Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's interview, where I'm really delighted to be able to chat with Pat Divilly, whom I met via Instagram actually, and connected through this generous, open-hearted spirit that he has that I'm sure you'll get to experience in this interview. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. And thank you for that. Yeah, blessing. That was nice.
Oh, well, it's true. It's true. That's what I felt. It's like, and that's one of the things that I love about social media because we can get very caught up slating it, and yet there are remarkable things that come from it as well.
It's true. I probably fall into the branch of people that slate it a bit too much for all that it's given me in life. So yeah, it's good to get the balance.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what life's all about, isn't it? Maybe we'll come to that in today's talk. Things are rarely all that and all this. They're usually somewhere in both camps according to how we use them and how we work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me introduce you properly to people that haven't come across your work. So Pat Divilly got his start originally in the fitness industry in 2010, so we're going back quite a while, gaining an MSc in exercise and nutrition science before running a successful physical gym and online fitness business. So there you have it already. That's one of my interests. Those of you who follow me will know that. In 2016, he moved into coaching individuals and corporate clients, sharing tools from this training via NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, coaching, and logotherapy. I want to come back to that because I'm not sure what that is. In more recent years, Pat certified in Breathwork with Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage training, who's a friend of yours, I believe, meditation, yoga, and trauma release facilitation, completing a year-long professional training with Dr. Gabor Mate in compassionate inquiry. He holds an advanced diploma in Jungian Psychology and is a trauma specialist training with the Arizona Trauma Institute. This is quite a lot of great credentials here, Pat. He's also, as if that wasn't enough, the author of the #1 best-selling book, Fit Mind, which we are going to link in the show notes, and the host of the popular Pat Divilly Podcast. Pat, wow. Sometimes it takes me a while to move through people's bios because they've been doing such good stuff in the world. Thank you for what you do in the world.
Thank you.
Let's hear about some of that in your world, because your bio outlines that you've moved from body-based fitness to mind-based fitness to the incorporation of both. So let's start there. Tell me a little bit about your story. Who are you?
Who am I?
Who are you?
I'm a proper nerd based on that bio. Yeah, fitness was my passion since I was a kid. So that was the first thing that sort of ever gave me confidence in life. And I suppose all the work I've done over the years, I can kind of craft or see the threads and how they align now. But I was bullied a lot as a young man. I didn't fit in. I was an outsider. We moved around a lot in my family. So I was always the new guy. And I think a lot of this sparked a lot of insecurity in me. So when I found fitness, I thought, okay, here's something I'm good at. Here's something I have some control over. Here's something I can create results in. And so I knew from 14 or 15, I was going to own a gym someday. And obviously back then, I'm 35 now. So back 20 years ago, the fitness industry wasn't what it since became. It was maybe you could work in a hotel gym or work part-time as a gym instructor, but the thought of making a profession in Ireland out of fitness wasn't really a thing. But I suppose, long story short, I used to go to America in the summers. I was big into cage fighting. I was a mixed martial arts guy. And so I would fight in America in the summers. And that exposed me to kettlebells and TRX and all these types of training that we hadn't seen in Ireland yet. So I came back with a fire in my belly to get something started. I failed with my first business. So I moved from Galway, which is my hometown, to Dublin, and failed pretty miserably with my first fitness business. And I came back and lived with my parents at 24, which in retrospect is not a big deal, but at the time just absolutely broke me. Financially broke, but emotionally broken, I would say. And a lot of shame. I kind of felt like my parents had been very supportive. They had helped me through school. They had kept me in school. And here I was at 24, having gone to the big city and failed in the big city and come home. But ultimately, I started again back in Galway and I started teaching classes locally on the beach. I didn't have rent for a studio, so the beach worked well. And I just built a culture here in Galway of, community. That's what it was about. And my classes grew really quickly. Within a year, I had 500 clients. Within 5 years, 20,000 clients globally. So my whole life changed. I went from broke and full of shame, having failed, to making good money and buying a house and a car and having external success and all that kind of stuff. But I suppose to my surprise, I woke up at 28 having ticked all the boxes, and I thought, I'm still not happy. And it was the first time in my life there was nothing I could point to. I wasn't broke anymore. I had good people around me. I was in good health somewhat. I had a lot of good things in my life, but I couldn't appreciate them. And in retrospect, I was just overwhelmed. I'd been going on at such a fast pace throughout my 20s, trying to become somebody, that I guess I was burnt out. And so that kind of led me to getting curious about what was going on in my mind, and then what was going on between my body and my mind. And in recent years, I deliver workshops, I do coaching, seminars, all that kind of stuff. And it's all around things I've had to learn through experience. So I always tell people, sorry.
I want to just pause for a moment, because there's so much in that you've just shared, and a few things really stood out for me, Pat, before we go into the kind of the transition and where it's taken you now. The first thing I observed was that you identified, and these words were specific to me, but they might not have quite as much meaning as I've given them, that you said you were bullied as a young man rather than a boy. So that was part one, and I want to just check in with that, because they're very different stages in our growth and our experience, and a young man is really evolving into that sense of identity. And secondly, I really hear this entrepreneurial spark in you that kind of had the vision to set up a business, did what you call failed, although, obviously we would come to question that now, but that you still went out there and started things on the beach. And you mentioned in specific relation to that, the value and the importance of the community that you've created. So these 2 points I want to just stay with for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And tease out. So was it specific that it was as a young man rather than a boy, the kind of experience of being bullied?
No, it's good you caught me on that, because I guess this speaks to a bigger piece that, they say what most of our imprints are formed in the first 7 years. And I think the Jesuit said, give me the boy until he's 7 and I'll show you the man. So my early bullying was in those first couple of years, like 4 or 5, 6, just starting school. And that definitely became my lens through which I saw the world. So if you were to look back on my life from an outside perspective with a camera, there probably wasn't a huge amount of bullying that happened. There was a few incidents and stuff like that. But I think my internal perspective from those early experiences was always that I couldn't trust people, that I didn't fit in, that I was the weird one, all this kind of stuff. So obviously how we see things impacts how we feel about things. So that did bleed out into my young adult life, I suppose. That sense of not belonging, not fitting in, not being enough, all those stories. But I think the initial imprint was those first couple of years, and I carried that, for years.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's really important, because it's also at the heart of Gabor Mate's work, which you've obviously now done this year-long training in, that these formative ideas and belief that we have about the world, which is very common, that you kind of go, well, I was only 5, or I was only 7, or, is it such a big deal? But it really is actually such a big deal, because of what we then start to feel is or isn't safe in our world and environments. And we form our belief system and structure around that. And what I'd really like to, again, rest with a little bit here, because you have the perspective here that, a lot of my guests on the YouTube series are female. And I think it's so important when we're talking about feelings and emotions and the worldview that we create, that we can stay with a man's perspective, a boy's perspective, and acknowledge that there hasn't always been the recognition of that as separate from what it might be like to grow up a girl with the traumas that we experience as women, and every shade in between. So at the time that you were going through all this, did you have support systems in place? Was it okay for men to talk about feelings? Was it not okay? You're in Ireland as well, maybe that had a cultural quality to it.
Yeah, I think there's undercurrent of shame for a lot of people in Ireland in general, from trauma throughout the generations. But for boys, my experience has been that boys can show anger. Maybe they can show anger. That's an emotion that's safe to show, because if I show my anger, you can't mess with me. But even to show my joy is a stretch for a boy, because what will they call me if I'm too happy, or if I'm too playful or too outgoing? To show your sadness will be a crime, so obviously we hold anger in front of our sadness to try and protect ourselves. And I think one of the biggest issues in my life, and I think that, it's a microcosm of a bigger picture, is that there's this competitive nature amongst boys and men. That I was talking to my friend about this the other day. I was saying, as boys, we played sport and we tried to be better than the others, and we tried to get our validation and our approval by who's the best. And so you're learning from this early age that you need to be the best, and that kind of bleeds into your adult life. And if I need to be the best, I'm competing with everyone around me, and I can't really embrace who I am because it's a competition with others. So I think there's that piece there. So yeah, the answer to the question, I suppose, was it wasn't safe to show emotions. It wasn't safe to express emotions. It wasn't modeled. It wasn't something that other people were able to hold. There wasn't time for it. You should be grateful for what you have, and don't, you shouldn't be X, Y, and Z.
Shouldn't.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, because what also, kind of lands with me is that you've talked about this competitive nature, and I love how you described about it's much safer to hold anger in front of sadness, or anger in front of feeling other kind of feelings, particularly for men. And yet you then went into sport. You talked about the cage fighting, and that's competitive, and that is about being the best, because otherwise you're going to be annihilated in the ring, in the cage. So I'm really interested to hear how that experience of what you naturally gravitated towards then was informed by not wanting to compete, not wanting to be in that kind of macho place of having to prove yourself, while still working within the fitness industry or the fighting industry.
I think this insight about the competitiveness piece has only come in the last 2 or 3 years. I was in a plant medicine ceremony, and it just came to me. I had all these memories of my lifetime of living in fear, and then my response to fear being to compete with other men. And I just, wept, and I broke wide open, and I thought, wow, this has been my whole life, has been running away from myself, so that I can be better and I can be more powerful than other people. So it's only been a recent thing. The reason I came to the martial arts and stuff like that in my teens was because I didn't feel comfortable on teams. I didn't fit in on the groups. I felt like a target. So the individual sport actually suited me better at that age. But yeah, the competitive piece has only been in recent years that I've come to kind of understand that, I suppose. And yeah, it was definitely an eye opener and a heart opener to see, Jesus, this has been such a burden to not be able to trust that. I think trust is built on vulnerability. But if it's not safe for a boy to be vulnerable, how do you come to trust other boys? How do you come to trust other men? And it's obviously a gradual process. So having to bury emotion for so long, of course, there's going to be a culture of mistrust. And when there's mistrust, I need to get ahead of you. When I trust you, we can walk alongside each other. But
and there's a problem, because you might have two people both trying to get ahead of each other, and they're never going to meet at the point of that heart connection that is rooted in trust. How do you bring that now into your work, since you've had that revelation about how important it is and what you've been doing up until now?
I suppose on a personal level, I think I encourage people to really try and figure out what their core values are and what's really true for them. That's the personal piece, because you need to know where your center is if you're going to find your center. But then the collective work is, I suppose, to open up the conversations and just to create safe spaces where, we can explore a topic. And then, I think my development as a facilitator was that I was a speaker for a number of years, and it was like, get on stage and share as much as you can, and you squeeze as much as you can in. And in more recent years, it's kind of recognizing that no, you share a concept, and then you get people to partner up, and you allow some space for digestion, and allow it to be, allow it to land. So that's what I try to do. It's like, can we connect people back to their essence or their authenticity? And then can we partner them with someone where they can share what's true for them in that moment? And then I think that starts to build trust, trust in self, trust in others, because you recognize, oh, it's okay to express what's true for me. It might not feel okay at home, but again, you build that confidence over time by having these conversations. So I think the people I work with on an ongoing basis, I just noticed that it becomes the norm, for them to, kind of off topic, but I remember years ago, I was doing a vision board, and most of my visions were like, I want to buy all these houses, like silly stuff that, but one of them was I wrote, I am a hugger. It was like, it was an affirmation, I am a hugger, because I couldn't hug anyone at that time. I just was averse to hugging. I hug everyone now, everyone gets hugs, and everyone in my space, so it's I try to create environments where I think the environment plays such a role, plays such a factor. So like, if I can create environments where there's guys hugging each other and not thinking anything of it, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really beautiful actually, because I can really hear that transition of kind of what you've seen in yourself, what you recognize in others, particularly, as you say, you stood on stage. I can see images on your website of you presenting to large audiences. You work in corporate business, so I want to come to that in a moment as well. And you've written this book. And then there's this piece of, once we come into breathwork or somatic practices, once we presence those core values and those emotions, then we know how to co-regulate, and we can recognize, I don't yet feel safe here. I'm not quite willing to open up. How am I going to open up just a little bit? Oh, hang on a minute. That's been received pretty well, and there's something here. So maybe I'll open up. Oh, you have that too? A version of that or the same thing, and the more I learn, the more I realize that we fundamentally have so many of the same vulnerabilities, insecurities, self-doubts, lack of self-worth. I listen to Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO, and he has a lot of guests on there who've got everything that would have been on your previous vision board, and they say the same thing, that it doesn't stop them having that I'm not good enough. It doesn't stop them having that I'm too much, or that something's fundamentally wrong. So ultimately, I think we have to land in this work of self-compassion and coming into the place where we can strip away these ideas of gender-based identity, not without acknowledging them first, of course. So again, another question then, in terms of, you go on stage and you speak, and you've already described how you do that differently. Are you still working in corporate environments, delivering what you deliver, and how might that look?
Yeah, I've done a combination of I do my own tours a couple of times a year where the general public come out for sessions, which is great. And then I do, probably 5-6 corporate gigs a month now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big part of what I'm doing, and it kind of just happened by accident, I would say, a couple of years ago. And it's a very different environment. It's like I had to learn to adjust my expectations that someone who's paying to come to your evening workshop is going to have a different view to someone who's has to go because they're in work and they're told they have to go. So I had to adjust my expectations a little bit on that front, but it's I'm proud of myself in that space, because I feel, in some ways I feel like an alien going into the corporate environment where it's very different to how I live and my day-to-day life. But I'm confident in standing up there and expressing ideas that have supported me and putting them out there. And not everything's going to land, but that feels good to, I do a lot of work with, say, people that are transitioning into management roles and helping them with their self-talk, or helping them with their communication, or helping them with, identifying their core values, their shadow values. So it's nice. It's different. It's funny. I kind of jokingly say that it's the only time of the year where my dad thinks I've got a real job is when I'm in the corporate space. He's like, are they paying you? I'm like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, where was I? It was somewhere the other day where this person had said it's so exasperating, because it was somebody who'd stepped out of a really big, successful corporate job and into something creative, and how her mum constantly says something about, oh, this is my daughter and she's a highly trained XYZ, but now she just does this, with this slight element of apology on the parents' part, because they don't understand how important that work is. So, you've talked about what you come up against in the corporate world. What is it you deliver in the corporate world? I feel like I'm speaking to somebody famous when you say you do a tour and you have these gigs and, 5 gigs a month in corporate and
Yeah.
touring around the country must mean that there's something that people are drawn towards in what you're offering. So what are you offering when you go into corporate world, first of all? You talked about mindset, you talked about values and
Mm,
shadow values.
mm.
What's your personal dream, desire, or aspiration with that?
My gift has always been connecting the dots. I think so going to the likes of Gabor, going and studying polyvagal theory, going and studying all these bits, and like I think of it as my hero's journey. That I go, like I spent years on all these courses where I'm the only man on the course, and communicate, and then I come back to my village and I've got the gold for the village, where I'm like, oh, I was just on my hero's journey and I picked up these tools that we can use now. So in the corporate environments, I'm trying to bring the polyvagal stuff in there, trying to bring some trauma work in there, trying to normalize, conversations around emotional awareness, giving simple strategies for communicating more consciously, owning your language. And it's really endearing, actually. Sometimes you might share something like, oh, okay, we're going to use I statements today. And someone will pipe up and they'll say, wow, we do this in wedding or marriage counseling. And I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the way I frame it. My last book was called Fit Mind. And I said, look, I've come from the fitness space. And for most people, there's a recognition with fitness that to be physically fit, you've got to invest consistently in your physical fitness. But sometimes when it comes to mental and emotional wellness, there's an assumption that we're either going to feel good or we're going to feel bad. And we forget that we do have some capacity there to, I often say to people that you got to train, you got to train your mental and emotional wellness on a consistent basis, so that when the challenge and the crisis emerges, because it will emerge, you're more grounded and more, you've got a greater capacity to be with the challenge. So I think it's teaching the corporates that as well. And I go in and I'm blunt and I say, look at the people 20 years ahead of you. They're burnt out. You're going to be burnt out too, unless you start looking after yourself. Here's how you're going to do it, So
That's beautiful. It really is, because it is a well-worn, well-trodden path that we walk when we stay in those same grooves of what business should look like, what men should look like, what women should look like, and the kind of ostracization of anybody who doesn't quite stay within those grooves and what happens. And we're seeing now, the biggest rise in our culture that's creating illness and disease at the moment is stress. Stress, anxiety, and depression by the year 2030 are already predicted to be the largest illnesses that we are experiencing. And I think when you can come in and you can bring all this beautiful stuff into the various workplaces that you're in and just say to people, let's start with the basics. Don't tell me, well, when you do this, you feel like that. How do you feel? Those I statements are so fundamental to allowing the experience of what somebody is feeling to land in the body. So moving again into breath work, why did you decide to bring the breath in? Was it from the sports and fitness perspective initially? Because you trained with Patrick.
Yeah, the breath was a really random, I guess nothing's random, but I was at a festival in Costa Rica in 2015. And we were at dinner. We had a full day of talks, and it was kind of a wellness thing. And this flamboyant Italian man just arrived at dinner and he said, we're going to the beach to breathe. And I said, okay. So I just went along with it. And we did what I now know is conscious connected breathwork. I had no idea what it was at the time, but wow, it blew me wide open. And I suppose at that time I was studying high achievers and all this kind of stuff. Everyone's meditating. And I was like just a 27-year-old with an overactive mind. And it was the first time after doing a breath work that I was like, wow, my mind is empty now. And this is amazing. But I didn't know what it was. So that was 2015. Then 2016, I found Wim Hof and did a week with Wim out in Poland. And
Okay.
Yeah. And then I came back from Poland and someone said, why'd you go to WIM? Pat McKeown lives up the road. And I was like, who's Pat McKeown? And they said, oh, he's like the best in the world. So me and Pat became friends. And but yeah, in terms of why come into the breath, I suppose it was a recognition that I was limited with the mind. Like when I reached, I suppose, somewhat of a burnout at 28 and felt really anxious and overwhelmed. There was there was an impatience in me and a frustration in me that I couldn't fix it with my mind because I was so used to writing down my goals and going and doing them. And my goal then was to feel calm. And it was like I was reframing my thoughts. I was doing all the cognitive behavioral therapy. I was doing all that stuff. But now I realized my system was just wound up to the nines, and so the breath started to create a sense of ease, I suppose, and give me a bit of creativity back in my life, I would say. I got quite linear. Oh, I made this much money. I want to make this much again next month. Whereas the breath just was like took me away from money and thought, well, what you actually want to do. And then of course, sharing it as a tool with workshops, I found, with the men initially, it was an easier in than meditation in some ways. And I really liked actually when I first came to WIM, like to that, whenever that was a couple of years ago, what appealed to me at that time, at that stage where I was at, was there was a bit of a competitive nature to it. How long can I hold my breath? And I mean, you only cared about that for the first month, and then you saw the benefits and you thought, oh, I'm just going to keep doing this. But, I've noticed that lands well with people.
Yeah.
People's eyes pop out of their heads when you say you're going to hold your breath for a minute here, and they're like, no way. So I think sometimes you gotta, same as fitness, that like my fitness classes were never the most functional or the most physios would probably come in and look at my fitness classes and say, oh, they're not, the biomechanics are not good here, the this, that, and the other. My passion is just getting people to get their foot in the door and have a quick win. And when you have a quick win, you start to build a bit of confidence. I think the shorter breath work can be nice for that.
Yeah, and you linked into that before in the previous piece that we were talking about within the corporate world, where it's the importance of practice and the importance of building resilience, so that when those more challenging moments appear in life, we have a skill set that equips us to deal with them without going under, without sinking or feeling that there's no hope, and I think that's the whole purpose of this series as well, is to just speak to people about the fact that, there are lots of us out there and we're doing stuff that really hopefully inspires people, but also does emphasize that importance. Because, I know for me, without the regularity of practices, and I always hated the word discipline because I'm a real freedom seeker, and yet if I sit down and I practice with my breath and I notice it, first of all, it becomes so much easier for that to become second nature, because we have muscle memory, we have a gut instinct, we have an intuitive felt sense. The body knows, the body remembers. And so again, the other piece that I want to speak to there is that when I went to Wim Hof in London, he was doing a talk a while ago. I went as a skeptic. I just thought, show pony, And I did notice that the audience was 75%, I'm going to say, male, invested in how they could use the breath to do one-arm push-ups, or how they could use the breath to kind of increase their performance and do what he does and climb up Everest in shorts. And but the beautiful thing and the clever thing about it was that then he brought in his guitar playing, his singing, and he started to say to them, don't just start thinking you're Wim Hof and you can sit in the ice for 10 minutes when you haven't trained. Like, learn to listen to your body, learn to listen to your heart. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's what you said. It's like a foot in the door access point to somebody being able to use those techniques in different ways, because they're not really one size fits all, are they?
Yeah, I think that I'm a big martial arts fan. I do a lot of jiu-jitsu, and they'll say the hardest belt you'll ever get is your white belt. And the white belt, like the black belt is what you're aiming toward, but the white belt is your first day. So it's like you put on your white belt your first time you show up. But see, that's the most important belt, because if you never show up, you're never going to get to black belt. Whereas people are obsessed with the end of the journey. So I think if we can mirror that to our own lives, I might think about something I want to change, and then I'm a million steps ahead. I'm thinking about so if I could bring it right back to like, what's the first step? And maybe the
Yeah.
Wim Hof is the first step. Maybe a couple of minutes of, it could be anything, but, and I've seen that. There's funny. I met a guy a couple of months ago, and he was kind of insinuating that, my stuff is the stuff I deliver is too heady, and people need to just connect to their hearts, and you get them to their hearts. And I thought, like, in a sense, I see myself as like the first grade teacher, and maybe Eckhart Tolle is like grade 6 or grade 7 or grade 8, like on the spiritual path. But I'm very happy to be one of the early classes, because the early class is just as important as the later class. In our educational system, you need to come to a class that feels comfortable for you, and that's my thing, is like, I want my work to be accessible. I want people like my father or my friends that would never have any interest in any of the stuff that I've gone and studied to say, oh, that makes sense. I'm going to try that. That's my goal.
And do they?
My dad's funny, because when I wrote a book when I was in the fitness space, 2013, maybe, I wrote a book about paleo nutrition. I remember my dad saying to me, "Oh, you can't tell people to eat less sugar. That's controversial." And maybe a year later, I think he sent me an article by the BBC about how we shouldn't be eating so much sugar. And I gave him that one. I says, "Oh, thanks for that." But now I have actually seen, I think I've definitely seen the work that I've done over the last couple of years has had it can't not have an impact on the people around you, I suppose, when you start showing up differently. So
yeah,
I think it's given my family the capacity, like my parents, my brothers and sister, I think it's given them an increased capacity to feel they can, again, trust, because they can be vulnerable. And yes, my parents are big into fitness now. They're never really into fitness, and they're super active now and coming to retirement, and it's nice to see. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat. What a beautiful explanation of how it's rippling out into communities. And I love that humility of being, the first grade teacher, and that because some people may not feel that it's relatable to go straight into Eckhart Tolle teachings or Gabor Mate teachings, so it's like, how do I get to access the people who are living a life like I'm living, and give them some coping skills and mechanisms that just open their experience, that maybe will lead them towards sixth grade, as you put it.
And also, just on that stuff, in some ways, like I'm somewhat envious sometimes of my friends that have no interest in any of this stuff, and they just go to work and they have their relationship and they go for a run on the weekends. And I'm just like, oh, I wish, but I've gone down the rabbit hole now. So I'm just like, I'm so curious about all this stuff. Yeah, there's a part of me that's like, oh, how cool it would be to have no interest in any of this stuff and just to meditate a couple of minutes a day and have it, go to work and stuff. So you can get lost in it too. So I think that there's no
you can, and there are times when that might be where somebody is, and that might be exactly, because I've had the same kind of feeling, like, wouldn't it be nice to just live a contented life where, we're not kind of doing this navel gazing analytics stuff all the time. And yet at the same time, I do that less and less now, and I have that kind of life where things feel mostly pretty good most of the time, and I can bring myself back into balance, because we've all got different levels of what it is that we carry, and some of those people may not hit them until something challenging comes into their world, in a sense of loss, grief, anger, rage, betrayal, whatever else it is. So there's a big range of human experience. So I just want to come, before we because we're getting quite into the interview now, and I really want to come to your men's work, because again, going back to the beginning, I feel it's so important for men to have other men that they can go to. What's your experience so far of your men's work, and what are your main goals for that? Is that something that's growing in your work at the moment in its placement?
Yeah, if I'm honest, and I should probably just say it out loud, because it's good to say these things out loud. There is a part of me that feels that it's probably time to start shutting down a lot of what I'm doing and just focus on the men's work, and just have the courage to go all out on that.
Right.
So like, stop doing the podcast, stop doing anything else that doesn't feed into the men's work directly. When I moved from fitness to personal development years ago, most of my clients in the fitness industry were female. And so when I started the talks, most of them were female also, because they just kind of came across with me. And then a few men will be in the room, and I'd kind of jokingly say, I'm sorry if you got dragged along tonight, and they'd play along. But gradually over the last couple of years, the dynamic shifted and there was more and more men in the room. So pre-lockdown, a couple of years ago, I kind of said, I'm going to run a men's day, and 150 guys showed up, and I thought, wow, there's a hunger for this. Yeah. And we ran a group for 2 years throughout all the shutdowns and everything over the last couple of years, and we'd meet every week on Zoom. And what really struck me in that was in the space of the 2 years, there was a number of men that lost their fathers. There was a number of men that became fathers. There was a number of men that went through divorce. There was a number of men that got married. There was so much in just 30 or 40 guys in that group. And there was so much that happened. And I thought, if there's not a place for these 30 or 40 men to express what's going on for them, that's a lot being held. And then you multiply that out into a global capacity where there's not much space for, death and grief and, all these parts that we don't really have the space, there's not a lot of spaces for. So yeah, it's happened organically. It's becoming more and more of a passion. And I think someone said to me, did they say your purpose is where your passion serves others? So I have a passion for this stuff. And like, maybe my purpose is to bring this out into the world and create an impact with it. Yeah, it's a key piece. It's simple things. And that's another thing I guess I'm learning is, sometimes I'm trying to impress people with stuff that I'm sharing and stuff, but really when it comes to it, it's like, no, just create a comfortable environment, share simple principles. And it's amazing the difference a few conversations and a few exercises can make in someone's life. So yeah, my focus is deeply on the men's work now.
I love that about your purpose being your passion and how it can serve others. I think that's really beautiful. So, are you still working quite a bit online for men who might? By the way, I've never you said sometimes you can say things and it can have that kind of showman quality, but I've never seen you that way. I see a humility in you and an accessibility that I think is refreshing. So I just want to reflect that back.
Thank you.
And I really, really hope that men can find you who might really kind of deep down, or maybe it's not that deep, maybe it's bubbling up under the surface, but they can access other men like yourself for that support network. Are you doing stuff online? Where could they find you?
Yeah, so my website is patdivilly.com. I'm doing 4 big men's workshops around Ireland in April and May, and then June, July, August, I'll run a 12-week container for men online. So that would be open to everyone. And I think that'll be quite transformative. So yeah, the challenge is I had a men's call the other night with a group that I worked with recently. And we did sometimes in my workshops I run out of time. And so I had promised a trauma release exercise this session. We didn't get to it. So I said, I'll facilitate online. But one of the guys said to me, how do I get my friends to come? He says, I keep telling my friends that I came to this and it was really good and stuff. He's like, how do I get my friends to come? So I'm going to try and come up with a bit of a tagline for the everyday man. Maybe it's that, we help you reconnect to your heart and connect with like-minded men, or, we help you figure out what you really want and then hold you to account in getting that and making it happen. So that's the next bridge to cross, is how do we make this as mainstream as possible? And you'd always have the guys like me that are into their personal development and will sign up to loads of courses, but I want to get the guys that need this,
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, you've put it out to the universe now that you were, maybe I should be giving up my podcast. Maybe I should be giving up this to focus on that. And something in there was like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what it is that's moving around you, through you, that is creating any sense of hesitation. That's not necessarily for you to answer. It's for you to,
it's fear. It's fear. It's fear. Yeah, it's fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
But I
reading
mean,
that. Sorry.
well, somebody like you, Pat, you've already been into corporate, you've already written a book, you've got background in some of the things that men will find very relatable in terms of the cage fighting and the fitness and the achievement and the standing on stage and the aspirations for material things rather than spiritual, soulful, heart-centered things, and it's not that you have to give all those other things up to come into your heart at all. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'm really hearing that that's your strong intention.
I hope so. Yes. Yeah, there's a little bit of fear there around logically I know, and I'm reading that book, Essentialism. I don't know if you've read that book.
No.
Pretty simple idea. It kind of says that, 4 steps. We start something new, and we have some initial success. So maybe you start teaching breathwork and you have some initial success, and then you start adding bells and whistles and this, that, and the other. And by the time you know it, you've got too much going on, and you've lost the essence of what you were doing that got you the initial success. So the essentialist way is the idea of really getting back to essence with, like, rather than having a really complicated health plan, like it's this, and this, rather than having a million different work projects, it's this, and this. So there's a part of me that wants to just refine all the time, all aspects of my life. And I feel just doing men's work might be a part of that. Oh, I shouldn't have said it out loud, Steph.
You did. You've said it twice out loud now, and it's kind of like, oh, watch this space.
Yeah.
So your course that starts the 12-week container is on your website, yeah?
It's not yet. It will be soon. But drop me an email if anyone's interested.
Well, I mean, it's March. It's March, Pat. Is it this year that you're doing it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, crack on.
I will. It's on my list. It's on my list.
So we're also going to put Pat's email below the show notes, because I think there may well be a lot of brothers who are interested in this. There's some beautiful men doing some incredible work out there. There's a group in the Northwest called Men Without Masks that Craig White and Matt and Ryan and loads of our graduates as well are involved in.
Cool.
And, there's another graduate of ours called Paul Garrigan, who does something called Pact Mentality. And these are men with beautiful, big hearts and not afraid to become transparent. They're getting guys up dancing who dance like they've got a robotic program inside them when they first come in. But it's because, we're not encouraged, men, women, and, all of us, we're not encouraged to really trust our own responses in the world, to trust in our own bodily expressions, because that's been shut down by people saying, stop making a show of yourself, don't be so silly, or boys don't do that, girls don't do that, X, Y, Z. So, huge appreciation to you for all you do and for all the skills that you bring into your work. I really hope that people look you out from this interview and that they can find out more. Is there anything that you want to say to close?
No, just right back at you. I appreciate all that you're doing. And, I've followed your stuff for the last couple of years. So I'm excited that we've gotten to connect in recent times, and excited to see, I'm sure we'll partner up on some bits and pieces in the future. So I appreciate knowing you and appreciate what you're doing in the world.
Thank you. I received that gratefully, and I hope so too. I really do. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody, for listening to today's session, and we'll make sure that you know where you can find more about Pat and his incredible work. See you soon.